let's look at the concept of organizational justice. Specifically, let's look at different types of organizational justice. Let's start off with the definition of organizational justice. What is organizational justice? A simple definition is that it's the perception of fairness in organizations. Now, it's important to note that we're talking about perception. If an individual perceives that an organization is not going to be fair, we would say that that's a situation of low organizational justice. If an employee does consider it the situation to be fair, that would be an example of high organizational justice. Now, this is important because both the causes and the effects of this perception are important to both the employee and the organization. Things especially go wrong when there's perceived injustice. So if you're an employee and you're perceiving injustice where you work, what are some of the likely consequences? One is lower job satisfaction. You're going to be a lot less happy with your job. There's going to be lower employee retention. Which means greater turnover intentions. People are going to think more about leaving because they don't want to stay someplace where things are unjust. There's greater absenteeism and theft, and this has been measured. When people think things are unfair, they try to restore equity, so they're absent more often, and employee theft goes up. The work quality goes down. People try less. Which again is an attempt at restoring equity. If people think they're getting shortchanged or treated unjustly, they'll put less effort into their job. Interestingly, studies have shown that employee health goes down. Insomnia and anxiety go up when there's a sense of injustice, and that physically affects employees. And another phenomena is that there are fewer organizational citizenship behaviors when employees perceive injustice. An organizational citizenship behavior are the good things that people do at work that aren't on their job description. Maybe they help a coworker with a problem that the coworker's having on Excel, or maybe they defrost the refrigerator in the end of the hallway when it gets all frozen over because there's nobody else to do it. All kinds of good things people can do in their organization that's not in their job description. That's considered organizational citizenship behaviors, and they make work go just a lot better for everybody. But when people perceive injustice, the level of organizational citizenship behaviors goes down. Let's look at the different types of organizational justice. The main type of organizational justice is distributive justice. How are the rewards distributed to people? So distributive justice basically answers the question, how fair is what I received for my work? And as we saw in equity theory, people generally prefer equity. Those who provide a lot for the organization, people are happy when they get more in return. But not everybody prefers equity. Some people prefer equality. They think everybody should get the same amount regardless of their input. Or we can also feel the need for needs-based compensation. The idea like, well, I have greater needs. I've got a sick child at home, or I've got a wife that's kind of lazy, or something can make people feel that they have greater needs than other people, and that if they don't feel their needs are being met, that can make them feel a sense of injustice, that the rewards aren't being distributed fairly because their needs are greater. So that's distributive justice, the first type of organizational justice. A second type of organizational justice is procedural justice. And procedural justice looks at the procedures by which decisions are made. So the question that we ask is, how fair is the process that leaders use to make decisions that affect employees? And this tends to be a very interesting topic. There's a number of sources of low procedural justice. If a supervisor or a leader is showing favoritism, people start feeling injustice right away. If the leader or the supervisor is unwilling to listen to other people's point of views, especially if it's your point of view and you feel that you have something to contribute to the contribution, you can feel that there's a lack of procedural justice there. Also, when a leader is unwilling to consider all the information available, and the leader just focuses on some narrow aspect of the problem where the information is available, you might feel that there's procedural injustice occurring because a better decision could be made if all the information was being considered. So that's the second type of organizational justice, procedural justice. Now, the third type of organizational justice is known as interpersonal justice, or sometimes relational justice. Interpersonal justice answers the questions: to what degree do leaders treat people with dignity, respect, and emotional support? Basically, doing the things that cause them to have good relationships with people. Now, it's interesting in that distributional justice isn't always possible. If an organization is having problems and they have to cut salaries or have layoffs, they just can't give everybody what they deserve, and some people will get pay cuts or some people will get laid off. But interpersonal justice, there's never a limit to the ability to provide interpersonal justice. And in fact, studies show that if interpersonal justice is high, if people are treated with respect and dignity and are provided emotional support, the effects of distributive injustice are reduced, like when there's pay cuts or layoffs. And so this is an especially important type of justice because it's not limited by the resources that an organization or a leader has. It's also similar to the concept of servant leadership, where the leader, the employee, or the employer seeks the well-being of the employee by serving them and doing what is good for them. So Jesus has called us to be servants of one another, so interpersonal justice is an especially important source of justice that we need to always make sure is occurring in any situation where we're a leader, a manager, or a supervisor. Let's look at a fourth type of organizational justice, and this is informational justice. Do people think that the information that they're getting is fair? A lot of times when decisions are made, people start thinking, oh, they're doing this because they're mean or they're incompetent or they don't have the full reasons on why decisions are being made. But with informational justice, we ask the question, is the information used for decision making being shared fairly? And if that information is being shared, people tend to accept the decisions a lot better when they can see that, all the information was taken into consideration. This was a hard decision, but they considered all the options, and this is what they were concerned about. And so when informational justice is present, people just feel a lot more satisfied, even if the decision that was made was not favorable to their interests. So these are all different types of organizational justice. And the last point I want to look at is that when we're discussing organizational justice and when we feel a lack of justice, we need to be aware of some of the cognitive biases that we as humans have. Because these cognitive biases can make things worse than they actually are. Now, what do I mean by cognitive biases? Cognitive biases, cognitive means thinking. Biases means that we're not looking at things in a balanced way. Cognitive biases are faulty thinking that prevents us from making rational, logical conclusions. And here are a couple examples of self-serving biases that we observe over and over again in humans. There are self-serving biases, interpreting ambiguous information in ways that benefit ourselves. For example, suppose somebody makes a joke that you don't understand or kind of falls flat. You might say, what were they trying to do? And you might impute negative motives to it, or you might feel like you're a victim because of that joke or that comment. And we interpret in such a way as to think that, oh, we're just and righteous and the other person is unjust. So we have these self-serving biases where we take ambiguous information and interpret them in our favor. Another cognitive bias is what's known as the fundamental attribution errors. Everybody runs into difficulties. Everybody observes other people's behaviors and our own behaviors, and there's this human tendency to attribute motives to other people and to ourselves. So the fundamental attribution error occurs when we blame difficulties in others' lives on their personality or character, while we blame difficulties in our lives on the circumstances, not on our personality or on our character. For example, if we're at a meeting and somebody comes in late, we're likely to think, oh, that person is always late, they're irresponsible, they need to get their life together, that's just really bad of them. Now, if we ourselves arrive late at a meeting, we're going to be thinking, oh, today has been so crazy, there were so many things to get done, the traffic was horrible, all these circumstances that I'm in are what caused me to be late. We tend not to think that it depends on our personality or our character. So that's called the fundamental attribution error, which is another cognitive bias. Well, how do these relate to organizational justice? Well, because of our cognitive biases, we can see injustice committed by others much more easily than we can see injustice that we've committed. As soon as somebody does something fair, right away we see it. Oh, unfair, unfair, unfair. But if we ourselves do something to unfair, our cognitive biases protect us from seeing it and saying, oh yeah, well, I had to do that because of the circumstances, or it wasn't really unjust, or that person deserved it, things like that. So we tend not to be able to see our own injustices. We're blinded to our own injustice and unrighteousness. A second result is that we can interpret ambiguous information in such a way that we feel like a victim of injustice and that we deserve better and that we need to take things into our own hands to make things better, when in reality, perhaps no harm was intended, perhaps no actual injustice was committed, but it's easy to feel like a victim of injustice. So when dealing with organizational justice, certainly we need to fight against committing injustices ourselves, but we also need to be aware of the cognitive biases that we bring to situations, so that we can truly figure out what is the just and right thing to do in each situation.